Mazzy here. It's the music, stupid. It is about the music. It's always about the music. I pulled some records today that I've been listening to recently and have been on my mind recently for one way or another. A lot of these go back many, many decades, and I just think they're records that were important to me in a moment, and to this day, when I pull them out again and play them, they're still important to me musically. But there is an emotional attachment and a time and place sense memory thing that I've talked about before in my videos, that you remember a time and an age of things you were going through. But I want to start out with a record that I was buying records occasionally at a young age because of the cover. Now, some will say, how could you afford to do that? And, I worked. I was living at home. I was a kid. I was a teenager. I worked. I had jobs. I had extra spending money. I get a little allowance. For a while I did, and then I didn't, I guess. I don't remember exactly. But everything went into music, of course. I mean, what was I doing? Taking girls out to dinner at 13, 12, 14? No, not yet. That would come some years later. But sometimes it was the cover. And this is one that I bought in 1968. And I was just fascinated by the simplicity of this cover. And it's a bit of a rip on it, unfortunately. But this is the United States of America. Look at this. How could you not be interested in 1968? Think of it, 1968, the year of the White Album. I mean, great, psychedelic era was kind of waning a little bit. Things were getting bigger and more elaborate, and everything was about stereo, right? This is an album that came out on Columbia Records, produced by David Rubinson. And of course, this is my original copy. David Rubinson became a staff producer at Columbia Records. He would go on to produce, well, actually before this, Moby Grape. He produced Taj Mahal. He produced Santana. He would later, in San Francisco, buy Columbia Recording Studios. They had a label-owned studio on Folsom Street in San Francisco, and he would buy it and turn it into the Automat, his own recording. He produced the Pointer Sisters as well. I mean, many, many bands. But this is really interesting because this is a band I always felt was a New York avant-garde electronic band. The genesis, though, is really in Los Angeles, although the two main members, Joseph Byrd and Dorothy Moskowitz, met in New York. They were part of the avant-garde scene, part of especially Joseph Byrd, part of the Fluxus movement, avant-garde electronic, stock influenced by Stockhausen into John Cage. Yoko Ono would be part of that arts group. Joseph Byrd was very lefty, communist, political beast. So this is a very political album, and maybe people who've heard it don't realize how political it really is. I mean, he wanted to almost call this album, if they didn't call the United States of America, the American Metaphysical Circus, the opening track, he wanted to call it something like Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. That's how politically it was, like anti-establishment, socialist, communist member. And a lot of the lyrics here, some of the lyrics are about just that. Dorothy and Joseph moved to Los Angeles, I think in 63 or 64, and they got in this whole collective thing, and they got signed to Columbia Records because David Rubinson and Dorothy Moskowitz were musically, connected in New York City back in the day. Now, this is a really interesting record because it is very avant-garde. It's psychedelic. It's electronic without the use of Moog synthesizers. They use ring oscillators and these really interesting ring modulators, I guess you'd call it, and doing all these different sound effects without the benefit of having a guitar. They had electric violin, they had electric bass, drums, percussion, and of course the lead singer, and all this keyboard. Joseph Byrd would do harpsichord and keyboard and organs and various effects on this. And it's really like an amazing, bizarre, cool album. And of course, when I was 14 years old when this came out, it was a great headphone album. I could blast being in my room, my parents' house. It has all the lyrics on the back. It has the very last cut, The American Way of Life, does go through a retrospective of all the songs, almost like a coda at the end of this amazing album. There's some catchiness to it. There's some circus light, calliope effects, obviously, everything from the avant-garde, but Sgt. Pepper may have been an influence, although they were really especially Joseph Byrd and some of the musicians were the anti-pop thing. So it's amazing. They burned brightly here, and after this, they literally broke up. And Joseph Byrd went on to do the American Metaphysical Circus. I think he later produced or arranged some of the jazz-like retro sounds of Ry Cooder's album Jazz. That's more in the later 70s, 1978. But this is a fantastic album. If you get this, I like the stereo version. There was a later, I don't know if it came out on mono initially into the stores, but Sundays, I think in 2004 or 5, did issue a mono version. This is a Sundays repress. I do not know if it's available, but this is a friggin' great record. I love this record. United States of America. I wish they would do it'd be cool to do a limited edition with that slip brown envelope as if it's top secret in a way. But a fantastic, very influential record. United States of America on Columbia Records. Next, a record by Terry Reid called River. This is from 1973. This is an uneven record, but it's a really great and important record, influenced and influential on its own. It's the third record by Terry Reid. He made 2 records. One I do have, Bang Bang You're Terry Reid, and it was produced by Mickey Most. He was hooked up with Mickey Most, a British producer who worked with Donovan and the Jeff Beck Group, did a lot of pop records, and it really didn't fit his style, and it never really caught on. He's one of those near-miss artists that worked with a lot of people, did pretty well, I think, also in session musicians and productions. When I worked at ABC, we had a record that he did with a white cover. I'm blanking on the name right now, that came out in 1976 that I promoted. Didn't really do a lot. But this is kind of the sweet spot, 1973, post Mickey Most, where it's a very bluesy, rock and roll. There's some folk elements to it. There's some improvisational vocals, a little like, the early, like 1968, 69 Van Morrison, when you go on singing. And he has this wild voice. Now, of course, the infamous story is that he was invited by Jimmy Page to be the vocalist for the New Yardbirds, the band that would become Led Zeppelin. And he couldn't do it. He was on tour opening up for the Rolling Stones and playing with various artists at the time. And he was committed, and he turned Jimmy Page on to Robert Plant, and the rest is history. So this is my original 1973 copy. Rhino and Light in the Attic did put out about 5 years ago this. There was a lot of sessions on this. This is recorded in Southern California. David Lindley, who would go on to play with Jackson Browne, was in this band. Willie Bobo, a percussionist, Latin percussionist, plays on it. Andy White, who would, he wanted to stay with Andy White. Andy White would end up going on to be the drummer in Yes to replace Bill Bruford. Bill Bruford's name always comes up. When there's any mention of Prague, there's a Bill Bruford thing. So this came out a few years ago. They used the inside photo for the cover through Light in the Attic, and it includes, they did a huge session of work. So this is a complete session. Again, there's songs that are brilliant. There's moments of brilliance, and there's some things that don't quite work, but I think it's an important artist, an important album. So Terry Reid, The River, is an album that I really like the original, and this shows that whole recording session, and I just think it's really great. So Terry Reid, still alive, and this is an unusual album. This is also a really important album, and this is one of my all-time favorite records. If I had in my top 100, this would definitely be there. And this is an album that came out on Rough Trade Records. This is an original UK copy, Rough Trade, Rough number 8. This is Young Marble Giants, a minimalist trio from Wales that only had one studio album, which is this. They had a couple EPs out, and then this. I was fortunate enough to see them twice in the same day, the only tour they did in America in 1980. They played an afternoon show, a day show, like a lunchtime, as I recall, show, Civic Center Plaza in San Francisco. I think it was for the radio station, possibly KUSF. I don't remember all the details. But that night, they played a wonderful set in Palo Alto, California, down by Stanford at the Keystone Palo Alto, a club. They didn't even play at a San Francisco club, which is bizarre looking back on it. But they opened up for Cabaret Voltaire, the avant-garde, minimalist electronic outfit. What's interesting about this, during that post-punk time when everything was loud and brash and, heavy drums or bass and thrashing guitar, this is very minimal. And it centers around the vocals of Allison Staton, and it has two brothers, Philip and Stuart Moxham. So it's just a trio of organ, bass, and vocals. Some minimal guitar work by Stuart. Opens up with Searching for Mr. Right, this beautiful minimal song. It's all about the bass. Dun-dun, dun-dun, dun-dun. Searching for Mr. Right. It sounds nothing like that. This is such a good album. I just love this album. Again, it was reissued several years ago in this form, and if you can find this, grab it. This is a double album that includes the original album and includes both EPs and a couple of loose tracks that hadn't been released. And it has a video of one performance in New York. It's got a word and picture book in here. There's the tape. We always like to see the tape. And, great liner notes, interviews with them. But again, this is such an important album, and this is a double album set. This was put out by Domino Records in 2020, so only 2 years old. So if you can find either of these. I don't think the actually original is really expensive, either the American or the UK rough trade, but this is a beautiful record, very accessible, but very, very minimal, and highly recommended. Young Marble Giants, rough trade, 1980, the only record they made, the only full album they made as a band, and it's just gorgeous, gorgeous. The last two things are very popular records and very Beatle-esque, Beatle-ish records. And these aren't deep dives, but these are records that I see that aren't getting a lot of love lately and I think need to be revisited. The whole thing with everything from Revolver to Pepper, everything remixed, remastered. I'm going to start out here with the 1967 debut, the Bee Gees first. Now, the Bee Gees did make records before this in Australia, Spicks and Specks, but this is their first proper album on Atco Records. Bee Gees, you all know the disco Bee Gees. This ain't that. This is one of the best pop psychedelic records ever made. I mean, this gives the Beatles a run for their money in terms of songwriting, harmonies. I mean, the brotherly voices always sound amazing, and this is no exception. 1967, the song that I heard that got me into this was a single called Holiday. Just a searing, almost church-like ambiance to it with those great harmonies. It didn't come out of the box with this big rock and roll thing, but this album is really a wonderful record. 1967, Bee Gees first. Now, they come out of England. They're an English band from Manchester. Family emigrated to Australia. They came back to London and recorded in London. So they are a British band, even though some people think they're Australian just because they live there. But those three, I mean, they went through so many different eras and different genres, obviously, that everyone, they became known, more infamous for their disco days of Saturday Night Fever. But turn of the century, Holiday, Red Shirt Fade Away, Every Christian Lion-Hearted Man Will Show You is one of the most haunting, beautiful, religious songs. It sounds like it was recorded in a huge, magnificent church, English church, obviously not studio effects. You got your Craze Finton Kirk Royal Academy of the Arts, which is very McCartney-like. They have their McCartney dance hall type thing. So that's the Beatles stuff does come in here quite a bit. But this cover designed by Klaus Vormann, there you go, who also did the cover of the Beatles' Revolver. So, the year prior to this one, but very psychedelic, very wonderful. New York Mining Disaster was also a hit, 1941. New York Mining Disaster, 1941 is the name of the song. And it's just a great, great song. And it tells a historic story, and it's wonderful. I Close My Eyes to Love Somebody. Now, probably my favorite song on the album, that every time I play it, if it's in my car, for instance, I'll repeat it 4 or 5 times. And it's a song that was covered beautifully by Nina Simone. Please Read Me. The harmonies on Please Read Me, there's essence of the Beach Boys, but the brothers Gibbs make it totally their own. So this is a really important record. People seem to want to scoff off this band, these early records, but their first 3, 4 albums, when they were the psychedelic harmonic pop, Baroque pop band, you can't deny how amazing these records are and how amazing they sound. I prefer this, of course, every once in a while it's fun to put on Staying Alive and Tragedy and the whole late 70s period that really made them, more than just another pop band from England. But this was and is such a beautiful record. Bee Gees first. And I'm going to end up with 10cc. 10cc, in theory, it's the amount of sperm of the average male ejaculation. That's how much we put out, ladies and gentlemen. You needed to know that. 10cc, I mean, this is them at their prime. They did a couple of records, several records, early on in the United States on London Records, and they were very kind of kitschy pop. Some see them as, ELO light. Of course, ELO light sometimes is seen as ELO light, but they're that Beatles pop band with Kevin Godley, Lol Creme, Eric Stewart, of course, and Graham Gouldman. Graham Gouldman wrote these great, great songs prior to this. No Milk Today for Herman's Hermits, For Your Love, for the Yardbirds. Great, great songwriter. And they had 2 separate divisions, Lol and Creme and Stewart and Gouldman. And this, in a way, is their masterpiece. Some think it's too overwrought, too overproduced. But interesting story about this. This is on Polygram Records. And after they had hits like Rubber Bullets and Wall Street Shuffle early on in pop days, they're very, in a way, early glam, like rock, power pop, but just great. And they had a sense of humor in their lyrics and writing. But they opened their own studio, Strawberry Studios, I believe, outside of Manchester as well. And they are about to sign this really amazing contract with Virgin Records. Okay, Virgin Records. So they're about to sign it. The manager's going to do the whole signing, and the band goes off on vacation. Eric Stewart, I don't know, goes to some island or something. And all of a sudden, they get an offer from Polygram, and the manager takes it and signs it. Of course, this became a hit, but the thing is, Virgin Records was a really wonderful artist label. They worked with artists early days of Richard Branson, Tubular Bells, and that really made them early on. Mike Oldfield record, of course, later Sex Pistols. I mean, a great label, Virgin Records. Would the things change? Would have been different. They come back and they realize they didn't take the Virgin thing. They're offered more money, but sometimes it's not initially about the money, the beginning, the advance. You're going to pay it back anyway unless you sell records as an artist. But this record, the original soundtrack, this is a masterpiece. Now, again, some people think it's too much. Of course, the song I'm Not in Love is probably one of the best pop records ever made. The irony is this was recorded at the same time and came out close to the same time, the same year definitely, as Bohemian Rhapsody. And it's the same kind of hundreds and hundreds of overlaid harmonies that they did. And I'm Not in Love became a massive hit. Now, Bohemian Rhapsody became a massive hit, but also they had the benefit of having as frontman in Freddie Mercury. There was no real frontman. They were all equal, and they didn't have that to I hate to say compete because music shouldn't be a competition, but you know what I'm talking about. Chart action, front man really makes it. And Freddie Mercury, as great as the whole band Queen is, I mean, that was the guy that pulled you in, sucked a lot of people in. And then you got into, obviously the talents of Brian May and everyone else. But this record starts with this long suite, Une nuit à Paris, One Night in Paris. It's got three parts to it, so it's basically this light opera in a way, this mini three-piece section of music telling the story of literally a night in Paris with the debauchery of the 1920s and the whole turn of the century thing of Paris with the ladies of the night and the cocktail hotels and music, burlesque shows and things. It's just a real opening treat. Great headphone, great stereo separation. This is my original copy on Mercury. I mean, this inner illustration says it all. This album is extremely cinematic. It's got this vision, this Hollywood vision of things, and it's got this great song, Life is a Minestrone. The Film of My Love is the ending song. This is from 1975. The cover is by Hypnosis, the great design firm that worked with almost all their covers around this period, as well as Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Paul McCartney and Wings, and just a great, great record. I love this to pieces. Anyway, that's my overview. That's my It's the Music Stupid 5 great albums, depending on your taste. I think there's maybe one here for you. And if you know these records, that's great too. Pull them out again and enjoy them because you probably haven't listened to them in a while. Mazzy loves you. Thanks for watching. Got to keep that up a little longer, right?